Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? We're still battling along, but we're going to talk about other things like wonderful supercomputers that can get us all excited with technology again.
Tell you what we could do with some of the heat off the racks in the supercomputer, because it's cold where I am, and I'm sure it's cool where you are too.
Yeah, absolutely. Just set up a server in the back there, just generate some heat. Absolutely.
Bitcoin while we're at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk about the newest, fastest supercomputer that was recently discussed. But before we get into that, just a quick recap of just the progress in terms of the coronavirus here in Melbourne and Victoria and Australia more broadly. Obviously, we had some quite, I guess, high for Australia numbers recorded in the past week. We're still going through a range of restrictions, and there's a lot of discussion around exactly where those cases have been recorded. For Victoria, the first wave of it, I guess, for lack of a better term, involved a lot of overseas travellers, and now it's a lot of community transmission as it's going through, which is what they were all worried about. And there was one thing, there was an ABC article which was talking about this concept of a growth factor as opposed to the R number, which is effectively measures how fast the number of new cases is going up or down, and we're at 1.08 at the moment. Now that's not necessarily too bad, and because, as they point out, if you were to apply that growth factor in the States, for instance, you got a whole different scenario playing out, and I think that's actually lost in some of the discussion around this sort of thing, that if nothing else, although it's all concerning and whatnot, it really is different in different countries, and it's playing out differently, and I just wonder how much of that gets appreciated in all of this discussion.
Well, I think there's a lot they know about coronavirus now that they didn't know 3 months ago. And what I find interesting is we're not really getting a lot of that side of I guess, the picture. And the reason I say that is because rather than, I think, some of the more hysterical reporting in the press about numbers, deaths, and the spread and what it could mean and that sort of thing, I think if people understood a little bit more about the virus and how it works, that would be really interesting. And that's the sort of thing that engages people and makes them a little bit more wary and makes them a little bit more likely to think of social distancing and hygiene along the way. I mean, one of the things we do know, and the G numbers are really interesting sort of development, I think, because one of the things we do know is the way we treated the virus initially was completely theoretical. So it was based around R numbers, which are transmission rates from individuals to individual, with the virus, and the modelling for the virus was all based on theoretical viral modelling, which by and large is fairly accurate in every viral case. But the actual modes of transmission and what affects the virus and what affects the uptake and what affects the spread is usually different in every case to a certain extent. And I just think that, for me personally, I think if the community understood the virus a little bit better, then you generally get more engagement. You probably get a better response in terms of dealing with the restrictions. So for me, I'm all for more information and for reports like that help us understand what we're up against.
Yeah, and just quickly, I don't know if you'd call it a comical note or a disturbing note, or maybe a combination of both, but we were just remarking before we got on about how people are reacting in the new set of restrictions. It seems like people were happy with the first, to work through the first set and sort of comply for the most part, but there seems to be a bit more belligerence around this time with a lot more fines and whatnot. Yes, there's a very unclear-cut way that all of these regulations have been applied, and seeming inconsistencies as well, when perhaps something just a bit more clear-cut should have been done just to make it absolutely clear for everyone. But there's a lot of people there's a lot more people this time around that seem to be a bit more laissez-faire with the whole scenario.
And it's natural, but I think this is a real failing on behalf of our governments and some of our policymakers. So, as we just remarked, the viral modelling is modelled and still being modelled, although with new information. And beyond that as well, the whole concept of regulation and 1.5 meters, 1.49 no good, 1.51 okay, it's ridiculous. But the other thing that comes into it is the human psychology factor. Now, if I've just been through a stage 3 lockdown for 12 weeks only a month ago or so, and I didn't get it, well, then I'm going to be fine this time around. And so I will be belligerent, and so I will have a party anyway, because last time I didn't catch it. Now, that's just completely it's very poor thinking. It's not particularly logical or rational, but that's what people do. And I think there's a fine line when we turn to experts and when we turn to modelling and we use our best endeavours. It doesn't take into account the fact that humans do what humans do. And I think that's probably the one thing that might have been missing, and hopefully we'll learn from in the future. Information, and also there's always going to be a certain population percentage that just won't play by the rules.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's move on to a new topic here. Haven't talked about supercomputers either for a long time or if ever. I can't even recall if we have, to be honest. But it's something that I think clearly we should have been talking about up until now. So Japan announced the Fugaku supercomputer. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. And it claimed the top spot in relation to supercomputers in the world, being the fastest supercomputer, carrying out 2.8 times more calculations per second than an IBM machine in the US. I'm always fascinated by these and what they're used for. Effectively, they're room-sized machines. You could, sort of imagine, those really old school 1940s computers with the tapes or whatever, but now they're super high tech. They are still taking up the same amount of space, but they're really serious in terms of their computing power. And obviously put to much more specific, really hardcore uses, dedicated to, solving problems or whatnot. And what was also interesting about this particular supercomputer was that it was based off an ARM chip. And obviously we've had, not that they're anywhere near in the same league or anything like that, but obviously the Macs are going towards that, PCs are looking at that. That's obviously a very small variation of what we're talking about here, but it's interesting that they chose to go with that type of chipset as well, and it seems to indicate whether or not, I'm not entirely sure how this one would work, but it seems like that whole trying to get more performance with less power type mindset seems to be pervading through the I guess the computer and tech industry, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Well, one also there on that last comment, power is expensive these days, and supercomputers drain a lot of power. So, but it's very exciting, and I think the way that they've been using the computer in Japan to predict where COVID outbreaks might be, rather than looking backwards. So what we typically do, say in Australia, is we backward trace. Someone presents, and then we look backwards at all their contacts and try to go backwards. Apparently what they're doing in Japan is a technique where they're trying to look forwards at who might come next, rather than just simply going backwards. And so they're using that computer to try to work these things out. We know that they're a very different society to ours, but it certainly appears to be working for them.
Absolutely. But even just like and the COVID type use cases is interesting in terms of not just that, but like I think they were talking, if I can actually find it here, that they were getting it to work on, and if it comes up quickly enough, it's churning out. Of course, what you're saying is churning out simulations demonstrating the frightening ease with which coronavirus spreads between human hosts on trains and in other indoor settings, which is obviously disturbing as well. But you can imagine if it can do that, it can do so many things. And with so many applications. But of course, I'm guessing there's a little bit of competition and bragging rights as well. This is the first time in 11 years that Japan's sort of cranked one out that has beaten either America or China. America and China have kind of been vying for those spots in the past 11 years. And it's probably good that, there's another player that came in to, sort of add to the fray, so to speak.
Well, capitalism, you want as many competitors as you can have, and 2 isn't a whole lot of competitors. 3 isn't that much more, but 3 is better than 2. So let's hope, the Indians or the Europeans or even Australia sets forward. I know we've got some pretty impressive supercomputers in Australia, but probably not quite up there yet.
Something we can maybe look into in a future episode or something is how long it would take for that type of computing power that they've created now to sort of eventually make its way down to, consumer level over how, it would seem that, it took decades and decades in the past for it to get there, but all of this sort of stuff is accelerating as it's going along. So it'd be interesting if, 20 years time, is it going to take that long that you're holding a device and you can hold a device in your hand that's got that kind of computing power?
Well, I think you could be right, and there must be someone who's done a blog or something on this, but I think today if you have a top of the range i7 chip, for instance, I think you've got the equivalent of a supercomputer from 15 years ago or something, haven't you? So something like incredible like that, or 20 years. So yeah, be a very interesting app.
Yeah. Well, I guess just finally, it'd be nice to be able to, sort of play around with it if they ever allowed, the layperson to go in and have a bit of a play around with it. I'm sure it's not as simple as plugging in your Bluetooth keyboard and mouse and away you go, but it would definitely be interesting to play around with.
Well, from the sort of experience I've had with them, the sad thing for the ordinary person is we just don't have enough data to stick in there. So these supercomputers literally deal with millions of data points, and we can't generate them as individuals. So you need a collective, like a population-wide sort of approach. So anyway, millions of data points, and unfortunately for us mere mortals, we can't generate them ourselves.
Well, I guess one other point too to make is it makes them perfect for those analyzing those big data collections, and that's something we've spoken about in the past too, that you need a machine like that to be able to crunch that level of data that's coming in.
The best thing it could do for us, though, is real-time effects without rendering.
We just have to buy a Mac Pro for that, don't we?
Right, these days, that's how far they've come.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there, and maybe one day we'll broadcast from a supercomputer. Who knows?
I'll certainly be better looking if that happens.
We'll have our own avatars anyway, without rendering. All right, so don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels, our RSS feeds, and you can watch us on all of your devices. And we greatly appreciate you visiting our website. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.